Good morning, afternoon, and hello. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, Workplace Violence Prevention at Today's Nonprofits. As always, I am Max Smith. I'm with 501c Services. We're a 100% employee-owned company that provides alternatives to state-run unemployment insurance programs. As many of you know, we provide services to about 1,500 nonprofits nationally. Many of you on today's webinar already work with us, and we appreciate you doing so. I have a little bit of housekeeping to go through before I introduce our panel this morning. We'll be taking questions as we go. I'll be interrupting the guys as they go. If you have a pertinent question, I will pose it to them and they'll address it as you go. Then we'll save some towards the end and address as many questions as possible before we run out of time. The materials today, the slide deck, is currently available in your GoToWebinar browser right in front of you under handouts. We will also send you a link to that deck later today. So if you don't download it now, you'll get it later on. If you're here for some recertification credits, I'm sorry, it's not right on the screen. It's not for CAE. It's for HRCI and SHRM credits. If you're here for those, you know the drill. You need to fill out the post-event survey for me and let me know that you want HRCI or SHRM or both. And I will get those to you most likely before the end of business today. Also, next month's webinar, succession planning. We're covering succession planning right after the holiday, so it's only a couple weeks away. I'll have a link to register for that event in the post-event email today as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. We got the team from P4 Security Systems out of Chicago. It's a bunch of former military and law enforcement security experts who now provide services to companies and organizations across the country. We've got Lawrence, Paul, and Dan on today. Lawrence is going to tell you a little bit about what they do to start, and then he's going to hand it off to Paul and Dan to go ahead and cover today's materials. So, good morning, Lawrence.
Hello, my name's Lawrence Doria. Good morning, good afternoon. I am CEO and President of P4 Security Solutions. I'm also Chairman of the Board of the Illinois Security Professionals, and I've got over 41 years in the industry. P4 Security Solutions is a protection training and consulting firm. We work with companies throughout the country on minimizing risk and protecting the people and assets. We work regularly with their human resource departments on workplace violence prevention programs, and we've presented all over the country on the topics you'll discuss today. I'm going to introduce Dan McDevitt, who's our Vice President of Consultation Services. Dan is both a high-level former military and law enforcement official, and Dan's instructed and has spoken all over the world on matters such as the ones we will speak about today. At that, I'm turning it over to Dan McDevitt.
Well, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As Larry indicated, I spent 36 years in law enforcement. I finished my career up as a chief. And one of the people that I had on speed dial at all times was the HR director. And we got to thinking about this with some of the training programs that we provide, and the fact that the security provider has got to have an ongoing relationship with their clients' HR people. We started to look at the importance of that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And let's see here. It's extremely beneficial for the security provider to have an ongoing relationship for a number of reasons, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. First one is to make sure that to help HR make sure that the company policies provide an emphasis on safety and security. Now, I'm referring to the company policies that relate to safety and security, not all policies. We're not trying to overstep our bounds here. To help HR to conduct training on those policies. A lot of times, if it's a policy that specifically relates to security and safety, the HR people may not have the particular expertise to be able to provide training on that. And this is where the security provider steps in. And as far as we're concerned, that is part of the responsibility of the security provider. And I guess the most important one is to help human resources create an environment or a culture of safety and security among personnel and supervisors. We do security analysis for a lot of clients, and it's interesting to note that when we go out there and do these things, we initially get buy-in from the leadership of the client. And once they publicize it, there seems to be an increase in the feelings of security and safety and an increase in the culture throughout the organization, no matter what it is. As long as it's supported, as long as our efforts are supported by management, people jump on it because everybody wants to work in a secure location. And once that buy-in is made, it really improves the entire process. Security providers got a vested interest in being knowledgeable about policies and procedures related to security and safety. And if those policies and procedures are either non-existent, which we see a lot, out of date, which we also see, or not trained properly, it's, I think, incumbent on the security provider to already have an established relationship with HR to say, look, maybe there's some things we can do to improve this situation. We do policy manuals and workplace violence policy, termination policy for a lot of clients. And a lot of them don't have these in place at all. Once we point out the importance, so we're going to talk about these in a little bit, once we point out the importance and get some buy-in from HR and management, it really works out a lot better and it keeps the entire workplace a lot safer. The security provider can offer to assist HR in policy development. Now, obviously, you have to have a security provider that is not only cognizant of these things, but capable of developing policy and also putting on the training. And we're going to talk about some examples of that in a little bit. In addition, I think it's incumbent on the security provider to take a proactive approach in offering HR their expertise in safety and security. And this is kind of a value-added thing from the security provider's perspective. Not only are we going to help to keep your facility and personnel safe and secure, but we're going to provide our expertise to HR to see to it that your policies and procedures are up to date and based on best practices. A lot of security policies, you couldn't hardly expect an HR director or HR employee to be cognizant of all of them. But that's where the security provider steps in and kind of provides information on these policies and procedures. Another part of the value added, that your safety and security equipment is adequate and tested. I'm going to go over a case study regarding safety equipment that was not properly tested, and it actually put people at risk. And that the company has an environment and a culture of safety and security in place. This is critical. You know, we do a lot of workplace violence and domestic violence training. And one of the things that we tell people is, it's unfortunate, but sometimes really bad things happen to really nice people in really nice places. And that's part of the job of the security provider to see to it that although you can't eliminate the bad things, you can certainly minimize the potential for them. You're supposed to feel safe at home, at work, and if you go to school, at school. And when people don't have that feeling of safety and security, they're going to find someplace else to work, or they're not going to come on to that employer in the first place.
Hey, Paul, before you go on, can I ask you guys to come off of speaker and use the handset? We're having the speakers cutting in and out on us, so if we can use the handset, that way everybody can hear a little bit better, that would be great.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I don't have a handset handy. I'm going to pull this thing right up next to it, so is that any better?
Should be.
All right, sorry about that. And this is Dan, by the way.
Sorry.
Providers got to take a proactive approach in helping to develop training procedures that relate to security. And here's some examples. Access control. Everybody wants to be safe, and part of the way that we're safe is we practice access control. You don't just let anybody in, and you only let certain people into certain locations. Evacuation procedures, trying to get people out of a facility quickly for either fire or hazmat or some other cause is critical. And this kind of is directed at the liability for the employer as well. If you cannot get people out, or if you've not trained people to get out and evacuate quickly, you're opening yourself up to a lot of legal issues. Safety and emergency response equipment. Having the proper equipment in place is only part of it. If people have not been trained in how to use that equipment, it's worthless. The same thing with policy and procedures. Having policy and procedure in place is great, but if people haven't been trained in it, then it's nothing but a doorstop. Bomb threat procedures. And we feel this is very important because in a lot of cases, if a bomb threat is received, somebody's going to probably go to security right off the bat before they even call the police. And having security involved in and cognizant of the bomb threat procedures and making sure that they're adequate is very important. Uninvited visitor procedures. I know all you have to do is turn a TV on nowadays, and you can see where violent intruders have come into locations and wreak havoc with people. And part of the training we do on workplace violence is make sure that your uninvited visitor procedures are in place and well trained. And then we get to what I call the big three. Workplace violence policy. Companies and organizations that don't have a workplace violence policy in place because they don't think it'll ever happen here are, I hate to say it, they're kind of kidding themselves. It can happen here, and it can happen anywhere. And all you have to do is turn a TV on to see that. Workplace violence policy is something that's got to be thorough, it's got to be well trained, and it's got to be understood, not just by HR and not just by the security provider, but by everyone. We just submitted a workplace violence policy to a client, and they said, okay, well, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. We'll send you your fee. And we said, no. Now you got to do the training. The policy in and of itself is kind of worthless without the training. Termination policy. We just had a situation in Aurora, Illinois, where a manufacturing company, they made valves for water flow. They were going to terminate a 15-year employee. They had 5 people present for the termination meeting, including a first day college intern. It was really sad. And they had the union people and the HR people and whatnot. They're all in this meeting. Here comes the individual who thought he was going to get his job back, didn't, and he produced a weapon and killed all 5 of the people in the room. The police showed up, naturally, in response to the shooting, and the first 5 officers that got to the scene were also shot. None of them were killed, fortunately, but there's 5 people dead, 5 families decimated as a result of not having a termination policy in place. And the final one is it's incumbent on the security provider to assist HR and the client overall in if they would ask you to, developing a threat assessment team. That can go a long way in keeping a place secure. I'll start with access control. Access control is the first step in safety and security at any location. And it's important that the security provider is fully familiar with whatever systems are in place. We are located in Chicago, and we spend a lot of time in the Loop, in large high-rise buildings. And the security personnel there, you walk into the building, they look at you, they ask for an ID, they make you a badge, they tell you which elevator to take. Their job's a lot more important than that, though. And they really need to take this serious, as does HR. In the event that the access control system is not functioning properly, or just as important, if the access control system is being circumvented, we believe it's incumbent on the security provider to make the appropriate notifications to have these issues resolved. If people are not using the access control to do what it's designed to do, and that is screen and limit the people that can come into the location, then it's kind of worthless. It's also critical that the security provider does what it can to ensure that employees are not utilizing are utilizing the access control system as it's designed, and that employees are not circumventing it. One of the biggest violations of access control is a process that we call tailgating. You have access control cards, key cards, whatever you have, and people are tailgating in that more than one person is getting in on the access control of another individual. We had a situation when I was chief of police. We got a call from a company, and they said, "Look, we have just terminated a guy. Well, we suspended him pending his approval by EAP to come back to work, and we want you to know we've suspended the guy, and he's not allowed back on the premises." Well, of course, the next day he shows up, and his key card has been deactivated, but his buddy's going into work, and he said, "Hey, I left my card at home. Can you let me in on yours?" And that's a prime example of tailgating. Fortunately, because the police were aware of this, we were able to respond and take care of the situation. We were conducting a security analysis for a large airline client, and we looked at one of their entrance locations that was built to accommodate both walk-in traffic, and it was also ADA compliant. And this was a very expensive setup. And the first thing we noticed was, and we had the company HR director with us, people were tailgating walking in. So somebody would go in a wheelchair or just on foot, and 2 or 3 people are going in with them. And we observed this happening. And the HR person said, "Hey, that's not the way it's supposed to work." Well, yeah. The reason it's a problem is if you don't know who those people are that are coming in and tailgating, it creates a potential for violence. It creates a potential for property crimes to be committed by somebody who shouldn't be in your building in the first place. One of the things that a lot of high-rise buildings in Chicago have is people come up on elevators, not screened properly, go in, pick up laptop computers, other iPads, iPhones, whatever, that are on people's desks and walk out with them. And it gets to be a pretty expensive proposition. With this airline client, we worked with HR, and we had to take into account this airline was not the owner of the building, rather it was a tenant of the building. We worked with them to try and come up with a recommendation for a tailgate detection system. Now, they're out there, and I'm not going to talk about the brands that we looked at, but they're out there. They're also very expensive. We researched, and we discovered a system that could be retrofitted. One of the big things that they had as a concern as a tenant was we cannot impact the aesthetics of our facility. Understandable. We came up with a system that used algorithms and infrared sensor beams to detect tailgating and preventing people from doing door props, where you just prop the door open for the next person coming in, whether they're supposed to be there or not. And it was, quite frankly, a lot cheaper than the system they already had in place. Panic alarms. These are good if they're tested and if people are trained on them. Duress or panic alarms at entrances to facilities are pretty useful, especially where you got access to the public. Receptionists are usually at these locations, and these people serve as choke points or checkpoints and first responders and first defense for facilities. Duress or panic alarms provide an opportunity for the reception personnel to screen people, and if necessary, to immediately notify security or law enforcement if there's an intruder on the premises. Any of these violent intruder situations that you hear about that involve a receptionist, I mean, you have to stop and think about this. They have to somehow get past the receptionist. If the receptionist is trained what to look for and is given equipment that being a duress or panic alarm, the overall safety of the location is going to be improved. The biggest problem that we've seen with these things is that they're seldom, if ever, tested. You have panic alarms. Yes, we do. Okay. When was the last time you tested them? Oh, no, they're fine. Don't worry about it. Well, we don't take that for granted. We're doing a security analysis for a location that has a history of either violent or potentially violent situations. This is a regulatory agency that takes people's licenses to do certain things away from them for misconduct. When we were doing a security analysis, we were standing in the front of the place in the reception area, and we asked, do you have duress or panic alarms? Oh, yeah, we got one on each desk. Okay, fine. Are they tested? Oh, yeah, Dan, they work. Don't worry about it. Well, when was the last time you tested them? Don't worry about it. No big deal. Well, yeah, it is a big deal because these two people that you're asking to screen folks, their safety depends on whether they can get help here quickly if they need it. We were assured that they worked. Fortunately, we had the two receptionists go take a break while we did the test. We called security for the building, told them we were doing a test, tried both panic alarms, and you can tell where this is going. Neither one of them worked. Now, looking at it from a management perspective, you got two people sitting there that you're asking to screen folks, and in a situation where there are potentially violent situations, you're kind of asking them to sit there with no protection at all. Well, we were able to get these things fixed. Fortunately, the two receptionists weren't present for the test, but it worked out. And I believe the place is a lot safer as a result. Evacuation proceedings. You know, when a place has to be evacuated, whether it's due to fire, weather, hazardous material, or any other emergency situation, it's incumbent on the employer or the building personnel to get people out of there as safely and as quickly as possible. It's also incumbent, in our opinion anyway, on the security provider to be very familiar, intimately familiar with the evacuation procedures so that they can assist in getting the place evacuated. In an emergency situation, a lot of clients have emergency response teams in place, usually for fire and evacuation. As I indicated, we spent a lot of time in the Loop in Chicago, and most high-rise buildings have got their own emergency response teams in place. They have fire wardens, assistant wardens. They have people to check the location to make sure everybody's out, check the elevators, special provisions for personnel that are not able to get out on their own, disabled people, and things like that. And it's important and it's very responsible. For those clients who don't have teams designated, we believe it falls on a security provider to give direction and assistance to employees and to provide for their safe evacuation. It might not be in the security contract, but I think security providers have a moral and ethical obligation to see that people get out safely. In these cases, it's important that the security provider work with HR to make certain that evacuation plans are in place, and more important, that practices of these plans occur. Now, we can all remember back to when we were in grade school, and I was one of the kids that went to Catholic grade school. And when we had a fire drill, we would stand up, cross our arms, and march out of the building. Well, Catholic kids always march well, so we would march out of the building to safety. And it was great. To this day, I remember that. And if I hear a fire alarm, I know exactly what to do because it became instinctive. That's what we're looking for. Evacuation plans need to include primary evacuation doors. How are we going to get out of here? How are we going to get out of here? And if this is blocked, what's our secondary exit? Severe weather shelters. We need to know where to go if there's severe weather. In the Midwest here, we're not going to have earthquakes, but we've got tornadoes and other severe weather situations. Staging points. where are we going to go once we get out of the building so that an inventory can be done to make sure everybody's out. Assembly areas, where are we going to assemble? And secondary shelters. I'm going to do a case study now of an evacuation plan that we came up with. We did a emergency operations plan for a client. It was a private and very exclusive elementary school located in Chicago. We made certain that they did annual training on the plan, and we stepped in, led the sessions, and it was very well done. They took it seriously. They knew that they had responsibility for these little children. They took it very seriously. We also included police and fire departments because in an emergency situation, we who developed the plan are not probably going to be there, but the fire and police are going to be there. And we wanted to make sure that the client, the school, knew exactly what to expect from the police and the fire department. So after the plan was in place, this was a 3-story building. The first 2 stories were the school. The top story was a business firm. They were working on the roof, and the roof was being retarred, and it started on fire. The business people from the 3rd floor came down to the 2nd floor and said, you need to evacuate, the building's on fire. Well, these people, knowing the plan that we put in place for them and having practiced that plan, did the right thing and evacuated the kids. Once outside, the fire department arrived, and the battalion chief said, look, and he sees all these kids standing on a parking lot in their assembly areas. He grabbed one of the adults and said, look, this is going to take a while. You need to get these kids inside somewhere because it's kind of cold out here. We're going to have a delayed reentry. Students and staff then went to the secondary shelter location, and you can see it on the picture. It's the round glass covered building at the end of the parking lot. We had made arrangements with that facility that in the event we had to evacuate the school, that's where we could take the kids. It was closed, it was safe, a good location, and it wasn't very far at all. Well, the problem was during the evacuation, as anybody with kids would imagine, they didn't stop to get the coats of these grade school children because the building was on fire and they needed to get them out of there. Temperature was about 38 degrees. From reports that we were able to examine, we realized these kids were out there for maybe 10 minutes at the max. They were evacuated from the building. Fire department was right there. Battalion chief said, we're going to take a while. Can you get these kids into somewhere safer? So within 10 minutes, they got them to the secondary location. One of the parents brought a lawsuit against the school director and the school for abusing their child by not stopping to get the coats. Now, having children myself and grandchildren, I kind of question that one, but we worked with the school director and HR. We decided let's have a informational meeting with all the parents that want to come. And we had as a matter of fact, we had so many, we had to do 3 of them. And we got all the parents in there. We explained exactly how we developed our plan. We walked them through the plan, and we were able to convince them that the school had done everything in accordance with the plan, which was based on best practices and was based on police and fire input, and the suit was dropped. In most cases, the security provider is going to be expected to take a leadership role in emergency. That's what they're there for. Having employees better prepared for emergencies is going to help the security provider to better assume this role. Security providers got to work with HR to make sure that this enhanced preparation of employees is not just done once, but it's done regularly. It's an ongoing process. One of the ways to make sure that people are prepared is to provide some quick reference materials that's going to give them immediate guidance in an emergency. HR is usually responsible for providing these materials. What we're saying is, from the perspective of a security provider, if these materials are not in place, it's up to the security provider to step in and say, look, we've got some ideas for you and we can help you out. And here's an example. Sometimes simply putting posters up at strategic locations can increase the awareness for employees. This one here, an emergency, lockdowns, evacuate, shelter in place. This can mean quicker and more accurate decision-making by personnel to responses in a real emergency. And it could decrease what we call a reactionary gap. Reactionary gap is the time period between you recognizing a threat and you reacting to it. And the shorter you can make that gap, the safer people are going to be, they're going to make better decisions, and their survivability is going to increase. Flip charts. We strongly recommend flip charts to be located near phones so people can they sit there, look at it every day, they will leaf through it. Now an emergency comes, power outage, they flip to the green tab, and they got a good idea what to do. We can work with HR to develop best solutions for this kind of thing. Bomb threats. In the event the bomb threat's received, it is more likely that the security provider is going to be notified immediately, sometimes even before the police. In the event the client has a bomb threat policy in place, it's incumbent on a security provider to be intimately familiar with the policy. They're going to be expected, security providers are going to be expected to assist law enforcement personnel upon their arrival, particularly if evacuation is deemed to be necessary. A lot of people don't realize this, but when the police get there, rarely are they going to go search for the bomb because they wouldn't know what to look for in the first place. And they would probably have a representative from the company or security who are very familiar with it go with them. Having a checklist, having a bomb threat report available for people and training them in it. Once they're aware of the procedures and that information that can assist them, if it's readily available, it's going to be used. Safety equipment. Security providers got to be familiar with safety equipment like panic alarms, which you already discussed, first aid equipment, fire alarm and suppression, emergency eye wash stations at a mechanical type location, and AEDs, automatic external defibrillator. They're probably going to be the first person responding to an emergency, which requires the use of this equipment. And because of that, they've got to be knowledgeable about the equipment, and they got to be trained in its use. As a result, it's the responsibility of the security provider to assist HR to make sure that this stuff is in an operating condition and it's regularly tested. We've encountered a lot of clients who contract for maintenance of their security equipment. And I remember the first time I saw this, I thought, wow, I wonder how expensive this is. But to be honest with you, it was really a great idea because these contract companies are going to come in, make sure the stuff works, resupply it on a regular basis. And this is opposed to having an employee do this as an ancillary duty. You got your regular job you're doing. Oh, by the way, check the fire extinguishers to make sure they're up to date and in operational condition. Well, sometimes having a contract company come in and do that for you, supply your first aid equipment once it's used, things like that. Sometimes that's a better idea. We've recommended these services. We don't recommend specific vendors, but we've recommended that they might consider it, and have got excellent results. These are photographs of some safety stations at an airline client that we've done a lot of work with. And they love it like this. They don't even have to give it a second thought. Contract vendor comes in, make sure everything's up to snuff, and they go on about their business. Of all the situations in which a security provider has got to work closely with HR, I think the most important one is workplace violence. Security personnel are often the first line of defense in these situations. Having a thorough knowledge of any workplace violence policy and procedure is absolutely critical. For clients that don't have a workplace violence policy in place, the security provider can assist HR in developing policy and training programs to educate employees in the policy. We do this for a whole lot of different clients, and it works out pretty well. The better trained people are in workplace violence situations, the more likely it is that they're going to be able to go home to their families. Workplace violence is just quick definition. Any action that could threaten the safety of an employee, impact their physical or psychological well-being, or cause damage to company property. And when we do training on this, we give examples. Well, the most obvious one is homicide. Also threats and physical assault. Workplace violence also includes sabotage against company property or company operations. Arsons, domestic violence, we'll talk about in a minute, vandalism, stalking, terrorism, and one that people don't think about is product contamination. We just finished a contract doing training, and this is about our third year doing it, for a company that makes candy. And when we talked about product contamination, they were really up on that, because somebody to put an adulterant of some kind in their product while it's being made could destroy, and in this case, this is a third generation company, could destroy their business completely. The security provider working with HR should consider what types of workplace violence incident could most likely occur at this location, and it's going to vary. Maybe you got pending disciplinary action. Maybe there's pending discharge situation. Someone's about to be fired. Maybe you got disgruntled employees. Divorce or romance problems. I've seen that at police stations. Stalking incidents. One of these can't take no for an answer type people. Child custody battles, another big one. Layoffs or downsizing. There's been a lot of workplace violence that has occurred because of layoffs or downsizing. It's important to realize also, and a lot of people miss this, a lot of workplace violence incidents don't have anything to do with the workplace. It is a result of ongoing domestic violence situations that occur outside of the workplace. All of a sudden, it's in your lap. It's critical in these situations that security providers work with HR to ensure proper workplace violence policies and procedures are in place, and that people have received training on them, to make sure that security is going to be made immediately aware of potentially violent situations. And in most cases, you can see these coming, or at least see some indicators. Make sure that orders of protection or restraining orders are properly addressed by HR and the security provider. There's a partnership here that's very important. When we do our training, we advise the audiences that 1 out of every 3 American women have reported physical abuse by an intimate partner. And if you take that as true, and it is, then you got to think that there can't be any mid-sized or large companies out there that aren't struggling with somebody that's involved in domestic violence as a victim. Security can help with HR to develop a workplace violence plan for victims of domestic violence to reduce the risk of a on-the-job violent situation, like safety when an order of protection or restraining order is received. When we provide workplace violence policy development for our clients, we indicate that it's best to have it mandatory that a employee notifies the client, HR specifically, when a restraining order is received, especially if the workplace is designated as a protected location, because the person getting the restraining order is the person named as a protectee. Safety when the victim leaves the workplace. Safety for victims after a breakup, which is the most dangerous time. Most murders in domestic violence cases occur about 72 to 96 hours after a breakup. Securing entrances properly. Collecting evidence, texts, emails, letters, threats, things like that. It's important because they can be used later in court. Developing a workplace violence safety plan for people, working with HR and security. These people can be advised to obtain an order of protection. Make sure it's current and on hand at all times. Make sure that a copy of the order and a current photo of the offender is provided to the reception area, police, supervisory personnel, HR, legal department, and security. To review the safety of parking arrangements, and if escorts are needed, provide escorts. Second case study is on domestic violence. We do workplace violence, domestic violence training for many clients, corporations, law firms, manufacturing places, airlines. And we've been approached, I personally have been approached a half dozen times by employees who are victims of domestic violence. And in many cases, their abuser threatened to come to the work location, or they've already been there. Maybe they're a former employee. During one of these training sessions, a female employee approached me and said she'd been physically abused by her ex-boyfriend, threatened to come to the location, kill her, and kill anybody who got in his way. She had not notified her employer. Fortunately, one of the personnel at the site that we met was a part-time police officer. We contacted HR, asked for their permission, which they granted, and we contacted the victim, asked for her permission, which she granted. We brought this part-time officer into the situation. Working with him and the victim, we were able to obtain a restraining order for her, got a current photo and vehicle information. A couple days later, this guy shows up at her home, violated the order, was arrested, and was advised by the police, don't go anywhere near her work location because that's a protected space. Termination policies. This is a really big deal, and there's been a lot of tragedies as a result of these. Involuntary termination is going to take one of two forms. Either a RIF, or reduction in force, where people get laid off with little, if any, realistic hope of recall, or somebody terminated due to poor performance or misconduct as a disciplinary type thing. Either of these two circumstances can result in violent situations. It's incumbent on a security provider to assist HR in developing a thorough plan for terminations. It's critical that if they don't have a termination policy, you help to develop one prior to the termination, not the day that it's going to happen. It's too late then. Policy should include determining a specific time for the action, specific location, have security or police on standby or present if needed, written documentation, and all administrative paperwork on hand and completed prior to the meeting. Final paycheck ready. You don't want to terminate somebody and have them come back in a week to pick up their final paycheck because they're not going to be happy. Terminate information access, information technology access, on-site and remote. We helped the law firm that was terminating their IT director do exactly that. I mean, you can imagine how much damage someone could do if they were into the IT realm. Recover access equipment, keys, key cards, fobs, etc. Arrange for an escort to gather belongings and escort the person from the premises. Provide the company with a trespass letter, advising them that if they return to company facility, any company facility, they'll be arrested and prosecuted. We always tell our clients, if possible, terminate by phone. And this next case study is a termination. We had an apprentice training program affiliated with a major labor union. We had a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, and I can identify with folks like that. I was a medical corpsman and treated them during the Vietnam War. This guy was being treated for PTSD. He threatened coworkers, brought him weapons to work, fought with the police, and threatened a number of people. A lot of the managers were also vets who ignored it. They're trying to help this guy out. I can understand it, but there comes a point where you can't. They finally made a decision to terminate. We advised them against conducting it on site. They insisted on doing it. We sent 3 of our armed personnel out. We had the local police department stage 2 officers at the location. Part of the process, this guy was given written notice. If he returned, he would be arrested, prosecuted for criminal trespass. Fortunately, it's been about 3-4 months ago, and things are working out. Threat assessment. It's critical that security providers are well aware of threats in the workplace so they can prepare themselves to properly respond. You know, some people who make threats actually carry them out. Most people who make threats don't. Here's a scary one. A lot of people who commit acts of workplace violence don't make threats. They just do it. All threats need to be examined in a timely manner. They need to be brought to the attention of the security provider and HR, and a decision on how to address them has got to be made immediately. One of my favorite lines is, but the guy just snapped. It's not usually true. Most attackers follow a roadmap to violence. We do emergency operations plans, campus violence prevention plans for colleges and universities all over, and every one of these people has followed this. First, there's the motivation, some slight, some disrespect, whatever, that nobody would think is significant except the offender. Then they plan. Then they obtain weapons. There's usually a precipitating event. They're having a bad day, their girlfriend dumped them, whatever, and they start the downhill slide, and then they attack. Rarely do these people walk away from these. They're usually either suicide victims or, unfortunately, the police have to kill them. Most people do this. Some organizations are addressing these issues of threats in the workplace by developing and implementing threat assessment teams. It's not that difficult. We've helped a number of clients, colleges, universities, corporations to develop these folks. The primary goal is to proactively address this stuff, address threats to prevent or reduce the chances of a violent encounter. It ensures that security is immediately provided to all affected parties. It investigates and assesses the risk posed by the circumstances. It plans and implements a risk abatement action plan. People are trained so they know how to refer things to the threat assessment team. Any incidents or potential incidents have got to be thoroughly documented and investigated. Security can and should be an important part of the threat assessment team process. And I'm going to bring Paul in. Paul was very instrumental in our last case study. This was threatening communications.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Holm. I'm the Senior Vice President here at P4. This case study was a client of ours that reached out to us, and it's a really unique study that really, and the reason we want to put this in here is it really illustrates where the current trend has gone in security and handling situations of this nature. I think when I got into the market here, I was in the military prior, and then coming back into Chicago into the security market, 07, 08, 09. All the talk was about how the trends changed and how everybody was still in the responding to what happened on September 11th and the terrorist threat. And now, fast forward 10 years, the trends and everybody's talking about how the environment is changing based on the threats that we all see in the news, unfortunately, on a regular basis. And that's the workplace violence and the violent intruder incident that happens. So with this situation, it was a large building in downtown Chicago. There was a tenant in the building which occupies 2 floors. They had an employee that they had terminated 3 years prior. Throughout the last 3 years, from time to time, he would pop up on social media and say certain things, but this one was specific and direct. He said he actually mentioned the building. He said that he waited 3 years to come back and to shoot the place up. Name some specific people within the organizational structure of the company. So very alarming detail and stuff. So they went to the building. The building pushed it to us. We met with the client. And what we determined was initially they wanted, we do protective services, off-duty, retired law enforcement. Initially they wanted a body in the lobby. And historically, that's how this situation would have been handled. We would have provided the coverage. It would have lasted anywhere from 48 hours to 2 weeks, depending on whenever the threat abated and the gut feeling disappeared. When I talked to the client, I asked if the individual was living in Chicago because they had indicated he had worked at some different offices. They weren't not sure. So I thought it was important that let's try to identify where he is. And the way we went about it was we conducted an open source investigation, which some of you may be aware of and some of you maybe not. But it's a great opportunity to gather information. And everything is everything in the open source. It's a lot of social media gathering, but there's also court proceedings such as bankruptcies, and if there's a divorce or child care payments that are going, you can identify those. And what that does is it helps you identify other levers which may change the risk. So we were able to do some open source investigating, pin the individual to California, And what we did was, at that point, we got a local private investigator to go and actually get photos. So we were able to determine the risk wasn't as great as what was originally thought, because the individual wasn't even local. So what we in fact did was give the company and the legal department and the HR the information they needed to make a calculated decision on how they were going to address this problem. After through the open source, we had all the postings. We then brought in a clinical psychologist who looked through, who was able to give some great feedback to the company on where the individual really was, and some of the triggers and levers that may or may not lead to a violent incident. And we're able to give some color as to what to look for in the threats and where the individual's head may be. Through his postings, it was identified he had some mental health issues. He was visiting a doctor. There was questions about, was he getting proper medication or not? So gathering all that information and making a decision based on that, and not just going with the gut instinct, is important. It's important first and foremost for, like, we all want to protect life safety, but secondarily, and it has to be part of the discussion, is protecting the company and protecting the liability if an incident were to happen. And you're asked a question: why did you make certain decisions? Why did you increase security? Why did you decrease security? In the past, a lot of those answers were, well, we felt it was safe. That's not going to float anymore. The information is out there, it's available, it's attainable, and it's important that you do with what's within reason, which is the question you're asked in depositions a lot, is it reasonable to expect you would take certain actions? So taking actions based on information and really doing a total, creating a total solution, gathering data, gathering intelligence to make proper decisions on your safety and security profile is very important. And that's where the trend is. And with this case study, as an end result, we were able to give the company a really good understanding as far as the threat. We took appropriate action as far as coverage. A threat assessment team was created. We looked at their policies and procedures. We made some changes and recommendations, and then we followed up and did some on-site training so that the employees of the company, we were able to use an example, a real-world example that really had an impact and really elevate their entire security profile.
Thanks, Paul. To kind of conclude this thing, I hope that we've been able to make the point that the security provider has got a responsibility to work closely with HR, and it will improve the overall safety and security of employees, visitors, vendors. Will reduce liability through having policies and procedures in place and effective training of those policies and procedures. And it's an opportunity for the security provider to provide a kind of a value-added service to their clients. And if anyone would like to follow up with any questions, I'm happy to stick around. There's our phone and there's our website. And thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been really, really great.
Thanks, guys. We do have a couple of quick questions. See how many we can get covered before we run out of time. Real quick, Paul was talking about the open source background investigation. Is that something that an employer could do on their own, or is that something that needs to be done by a professional?
So anybody can do it. A professional, and we have investigators, and actually part of what we do is our investigators go throughout the country and give classes on this. And one of the classes we do is a 2-day class, and there's so much information available and so many tools online that by the end of the class, a lot of times people's heads are spinning, but they have the tools that they need. And to give you an example, for instance, like Facebook, you could take URLs from Facebook, and there's actual available online resources where you can plug a URL into and hit enter, and it'll sort out photos and postings and comments and really helps you to digest and analyze. Anybody can do it, and It really is just a matter of time and really getting familiar with the different tools that are available.
You can do keyword searches also. If you've got an address or a name and you want to do a keyword search to see how many times that's come up on social media, you can do that as well.
Yeah, different states have different information available, so it's that could get a little tricky because some states allow for, as an example, for arrests to be public knowledge. Some states don't. So depending upon where you're looking and what state you're in, you could have some changes. But certainly, I would encourage anybody to look into it, do a little research on their own, and find some of the different tools that are available. And again, if you have time and effort, you can really learn how to do those searches.
And if it's an imminent threat and you need to get a hold of a professional, give us a call and we can certainly refer you to someone who can help you out.
And then also, you all had started and you said that when you first arrive somewhere, a lot of times you'll find policies and procedures that are, if they exist at all, they're antiquated. So, I'm at a nonprofit. I've got limited resources. I've just gotten a new desk and I'm sitting down to address this stuff. And I find out that, like you said, it's old and antiquated, or it's just not there. And I've got to kind of triage this stuff because I got limited time and resources. Can you kind of point us in the right direction where we need to start? What's the most important thing to start with, and then maybe a quick timeline, real quick, of do A, B, C, very quickly to get yourself up and running?
I think the first thing you need to take a look at as far as policies and procedures are life safety issues. Workplace violence, termination policy, evacuation policy. If you have a shelter in place or violent intruder policy, take a look at those because those are life safety. You've got time to look at paperwork, policies, and things like that because, quite frankly, nobody's going to get hurt if those are violated. But the life safety issues, you need to take a good look at. Now, you might go to a similar entity, similar organization, borrow their policies, and give yourself an idea what yours need to look like. However, if you do that, and I know a lot of police departments do this, you have to make sure to go through carefully and tweak it to meet the needs and the organization of your own entity. Yeah, in other words, you can't just take it and adopt it wholesale. You got to take a look and make sure it really applies.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that does it. I think we're good to go. Guys, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate everybody for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, you can talk now.